It was just recently announced that the U.S. Army awarded Sig Sauer a 10-year contract to produce and manufacture rifles for their next generation squad weapons program. And these rifles are going to replace the M4 as well as the M249 SAW. Now, not only are they replacing the rifles, but they're replacing 5.56 as well as 7.62 NATO with a new ammunition. So let's talk about what the future of prepper rifles might be based on this information, and let's compare the ammunition differences to see if this new chambering is actually the way of the future. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper. Today we're talking about the future of prepper rifles based on the fact that the US Army is now phasing out the M4, aka the AR-15, and the M249 SAW, which I'm sure many of you don't own an M249 SAW, but I know a couple of you do, so you know who you are. Now, this is a big deal because not only are they phasing out one of the most popular rifle platforms in the entire country, but they're also changing the type of ammunition they're going to use. And right here on the table you see a couple of Sig Sauer rifles. This is a Sig Sauer 716i chambered in 7.62 NATO, and this is a Sig Sauer M400 Tread chambered in 5.56 NATO. Now, both of those are military cartridges as of right now, yet those are the cartridges that are being phased out in favor of one singular cartridge. And the new rifles that are going to be replacing the M4 as well as the M249 SAW are both chambered in that same cartridge. So this is a big deal. It's something we should pay attention to in the sense of logistics, as well as the future of what may be more efficient in the sense of a rifle system. And eventually, as preppers, we might phase into that department. Now, if you want to stay up to date on information like this and you're preparing for whatever might come here in the future, then hit the subscribe button below, because this is the information we like to talk about here on this channel. And you also might have been unsubscribed anyway, so just double check, okay? Now, as a caveat, before we start comparing ammunition specs and before we start talking about these new rifles that are coming out and some of the things you might want to consider in the sense of your own preparedness, keep in mind that 5.56 and 7.62 NATO aren't going anywhere for a very long time. And rifle platforms like these are going to be relevant for a very long time as well. So there's no rush to go grab a bunch of this new ammunition or grab these new rifle platforms while they're extremely expensive. But at the end of the day, we have to at least keep in mind that this might be an eventual transition and might be a viable option, especially in the sense of a compromise round that can do everything we want it to do without having to have different options on the table, aka long-range 7.62 powerhouse and excellent CQB as well as general purpose rifle 5.56 NATO, right? Now, first and foremost, the way they're replacing the rifles can give you some ideas about how you might want to look into your rifle system right now. So the XM5 rifle is what's replacing the M4 or your AR-15, right? Now the XM5 is only different in a couple ways, but in one way it's different is that it has a piston system inside of it rather than relying on like a buffer tube. So it's not gonna have a big buffer system in the back, which means that it can have a foldable stock, right? The other thing to keep in mind is that these rifles, the XM5 as well as the XM250, which is replacing the M249 SAW, those rifles both come automatically suppressed. They're putting suppressors on these rifles as a standard issue situation. That should definitely tell you something. The future is suppression because A, it is better for your footprint in the sense of not making everyone aware of your position, but B, it's also better for mitigating recoil, muzzle flash, all the things that are a negative when it comes to shooting a rifle. So keep that in mind, and if you don't own a suppressor, well, it's definitely something you should look into, and it's something that I have in jail right now and will eventually be the owner of. But at the same time, if you live somewhere where you can't get one, just be aware that this is what the military is moving to, standardized suppression on every rifle. Now, they are expensive, that's part of the deal, but we're talking about the future here, and the future is not going to be cheap, now is it? All right, so moving on from there, the XM5, like I said, replaces the M4, and then the XM250 replaces the M249 SAW, which is basically an automatic rifle, aka a machine gun, but this is easy to be carried by a singular troop, so it's a little bit lighter weight, so is the ammunition, so it makes it more mobile. Basically, that's the whole idea behind it. Now, the initial delivery on order of this contract is worth $20.4 million, and it includes parts, spares, accessories, and the rifles themselves, as well as the ammunition, so they can do testing and everything else. And this, like I said, this is for the US Army, okay? Now, here's some things you want to keep in mind. The ammunition is the big game changer here. This is a whole different ball game now than what we've been used to in the past. Like I said, 5.56, 7.62 NATO, they're not going anywhere. But this new ammunition is 6.8 by 51, also known on the civilian market as SIG FURY or 277 FURY, okay? However you want to look at it. But at the end of the day, that's what it's called, and that's what the different ammunition types are. And now there are a couple versions of the 277 FURY that we'll have to actually compare, because one of them is what's being offered to the military, and it's still available on the civilian market as well. And then the other one is like a little bit toned down and not quite exactly what you would see in the military, but it still has all of basically the same idea behind it. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, because look, we're moving up to a much bigger cartridge compared to the 5.56. That is huge. And there was a lot of reasons for that, I'm sure, especially in the sense of long-range engagements that some people reported experiencing in places like Afghanistan, where the 5.56 maybe just didn't have enough legs behind it. So this is something that they are trying to fix. And I also would assume that some of this has to do with the fact that they're dealing with more modernized, more superpower style militaries that have armor specifically built to propel things like 5.56, right? Okay, now, I guess repel would have made more sense, but who cares about English? Now, the other thing they're moving towards, and this is a big deal too, it's something you should definitely keep in mind, is that they're looking at the XM157 fire control, which is a overlay display for an optic that is going to tell a soldier everything they need to know about making their shot. And what that's going to be is it's going to attach to a LPVO or a low power variable optic, and it's going to give them a readout on their lens that will tell them things like range to target. It will show them where to hold their point of aim in the sense of calculating things like atmospheric pressure. It will calculate the temperature, the wind speed, all those things. And then it'll also integrate with smart magazines and stuff like that, where it can actually tell you your round count and everything else. So a huge display that's going to give everybody everything they need in the sense of making those shots count. And it's going to attach directly to an LPVO that's being produced by Vortex. Now, I've been told, and from what I can tell anyway, based on some of the things I've seen at like SHOT Show, that fire control unit will be available on the civilian market as well eventually, and can attach to just about any low power variable optic. So I do find that to be pretty interesting, but that's all hearsay for now until we see it in person, right? Okay, so they're getting the full suite of electronics with a low power variable optic. They're getting suppressors standard on the rifles. They don't have to worry about a buffer tube, so they can have folding stocks for better transport in vehicles and things like that. And they move to the 6.8 by 51 or the 277 FURY, which is a high pressure but also high energy round that can reach out at a distance but still saves weight enough to mitigate the difference of carrying 308 versus 5.56. Now, let's compare the ammunition and how that all works, okay? So, first and foremost, 277 FURY, when it comes to the military style of 277 FURY, is going to be called hybrid on the civilian market. The reason it's hybrid is because the cartridge itself is actually two different metals that are connected, and that's the way that it can handle the extreme amount of pressure that's produced by that round, and it also lightens the weight of the overall cartridge, which makes it a little bit more comparable to carrying 5.56 versus 308. So that's how they got away with this whole compromise situation. And in all honesty, as a prepper, I'm excited about compromises in the sense of having a round that can do everything. Be lightweight, which means I can carry a lot of it, but at the same time get down range and hit a target with a lot of force, or deal with barriers and penetrate when you need it to. So these are things to keep in mind. Now, let's talk about specs of the ammunition so you can kind of just see where things are going and why this was a choice that was made, all right? SIG 277 FURY Hybrid comes with a 150 grain polymer tip bullet, okay? So 150 grain is just about the same as what you see with 7.62 NATO. It then has velocities of at a 16-inch barrel, 2,830 feet per second, and out of a 24-inch barrel, 3,120 feet per second. Now that's pretty good. And they're actually telling you the 16-inch barrel velocities because that is going to be what these barrels are lengthwise in many configurations. And honestly, most manufacturers tell you an extremely long barrel length when they're telling you their velocities because it makes it look better. So they're at least giving you the nitty-gritty here, which I find to be useful. Now, the foot-pounds of energy out of a 16-inch barrel is 2,667, and out of a 24-inch barrel will be 3,242, okay? And we'll talk about this in a minute, why all that's pretty impressive. It has a ballistic coefficient of 0.5, which is really good, which means this bullet can fly really straight for a very long time. and it produces 80,000 psi of pressure, which means not only is this cartridge specifically designed to handle that kind of pressure, but the rifles it's going to be put into are also designed for that. The chamber pressures that those rifles are going to experience is extremely high, so everything has to be reinforced and whatnot, I'm sure, and it's not something that you can just shoot in any other commercial variant of a rifle, at least not as of right now. So these are things to keep in mind. This is a very high pressure, which means, for all I know, this could hurt barrel life, this could just hurt overall life of these rifles, but at the end of the day, you're getting what you want out of the round, so I guess you have to compromise somewhere, right? Now, the civilian version of the 277 Fury, which, like I said, you can probably buy both, but this is the one that's a lot cheaper and something you would be able to practice with more readily anyway, is going to be like their elite ball. So 277 Fury elite ball, 135 grain full metal jacket, so a little bit lighter than what your 308 or 7.62 NATO ball ammo would be. And then out of a 16-inch barrel, it has 2,750 feet per second in the velocity department, and out of a 24-inch barrel, it has 3,000 feet per second, all right? And then energy foot-pounds out of a 16-inch barrel is going to give you 2,267, and out of a 24-inch barrel is going to give you 2,697, okay? So a lot of energy and a lot of velocity out of this round. This is what they're switching to from the 5.56, which is what the obviously M4 and the M249 SAW were chambered in, but I assume that this is going to eventually get rid of 7.62 NATO in many ways as well. Okay, so let's compare to 5.56 NATO, and then we'll compare to 7.62 NATO as well. And now all of these numbers are from Sig Sauer's website. I'm using their ammunition to compare it all because they're the ones creating this 277 Fury. And at the end of the day, I did have to get some of this information from like sources like Hornady, because some of the things like the ballistic coefficients or some of the pressures weren't necessarily available directly on Sig Sauer's website. But generally, if you're talking about 150 grain boat tail full metal jacket 30 caliber bullet, it's going to be about the same. So that's the information that I supplemented with in order to make sure everything was complete here. So the 5.56 by 45 NATO. 55 grain full metal jacket, your M193, which is kind of just the standard practice range round most people use, okay? 3,165 feet per second out of a likely 20-inch barrel, okay? This is generally what they're going to get that velocity with. So a 20-inch barrel, like your standard M16, probably going to be a little bit slower out of your M4 with a 16-inch barrel. 1,224 foot-pounds of energy is produced by that round. The ballistic coefficient's 0.243, and it has about 58,000 psi of pressure. Now, pressure's lower, recoil's a little bit easier to deal with, right? It's a nice shooting round, but at the end of the day, we're talking the difference of 1,224 foot-pounds of energy against the SIG 277 Fury Hybrid, which is going to give you 2,667 foot-pounds of energy out of a 16-inch barrel. And this 5.56 is probably coming out of a 20-inch barrel, right? And at the end of the day, the ballistic coefficient 0.243 versus 0.5, that's a big difference downrange. There's a lot more that can happen with wind and whatnot when you talk about that big of a difference in ballistic coefficient. All right, now let's talk about 7.62 NATO, okay? And this is actually from SIG's 308 ball ammo, which is 150 grains, not quite your standard 7.62 by 51 NATO, which is usually around 147, but it's what they have, and I wanted to compare their ammunition for the purpose of this process and having some kind of a control. So 7.62 NATO or 308, mostly interchangeable, a little bit different in the pressure department. 150 grain full metal jacket, okay? 2,900 feet per second out of a 24-inch barrel. Keep that in mind, because this is going to matter. 2,802 foot-pounds of energy, plenty in the energy department. Ballistic coefficient, 0.398. And like I said, this is a full metal jacket boat tail 30 caliber bullet. And the pressure produced by the 7.62 NATO is generally around 62,000 psi. So still not as much pressure, easier on your rifle, easier on your barrel. But here's the kicker, okay? The 277 Fury Hybrid, out of a 16-inch barrel, is running 2,667 foot-pounds of energy. The 7.62 NATO, out of a 24-inch barrel, is getting 2,802 foot-pounds of energy. So we're only talking like 150 foot-pounds difference of energy, and we're also talking about the difference of like 8 inches of barrel length. Well, let's compare the two 24-inch numbers, right? So the 24-inch barrel for the 277 Fury produces 3,242 foot-pounds of energy. against 2,802 foot-pounds of energy for the 24-inch barrel on 7.62 NATO. So you are getting a lot more energy out of the 277 Fury, or what it will be known as in the military as 6.8 by 51 or 6.8 common caliber, whatever it is they're calling it. At the end of the day, what you and I will be buying if we ever move into that realm is 277 Fury. So this is information I wanted to share with you to give you some ideas about the future of where these rifles are going. Right now, these rifles are very indicative of what you would see in the military or maybe with law enforcement or something along those lines, right? And we obviously as preppers study that kind of stuff because it's been well vetted and tested, and there's a lot of reasons why those choices are made. So keeping that all in mind, the fact that the military has chose to move to standardized suppression on their rifles using suppressors, right? They're moving to low power variable optics that have a HUD display that tells you everything you'd want to know like you were playing Halo, right? And at the same time, they're using a caliber in their ammunition loading that has a ton more energy than 5.56, a lot more energy than 308, and is supposed to be very lightweight in comparison to 308 and almost as light as 5.56, or at least getting close to that. I mean, these moves might make sense. It doesn't mean you and I have to do anything right this second. And I'm pretty sure that the MCX Spear, which is what SIG is calling their NGSW rifle, the XM5 for the civilian market, I'm pretty sure it's like $8,000. So I'm not getting one. And I doubt you are either, but if you do, let me know because it'd be cool to check it out. But all I'm trying to say is that we should at least pay attention to this. And if at the end of the day, we have to stick with things like 5.56 or 308, 7.62 NATO for the time being because of its popularity and its abundance and everything else, fine. It's effective, it does the job, and it's great ammunition. But take at least the fact that we're getting suppressors and LPVOs and all that stuff into consideration and think about how things might move forward from there, okay? This is all good information. This is where the future of rifles is going in the sense of the military, which means preppers tend to follow those trends at some point in time. Don't expect to see these rifles go anywhere anytime soon, but at the end of the day, if an MCX Spear eventually becomes affordable and the ammunition becomes abundant and things are well vetted and going well, especially against, I don't know, foreign body armor, it might be something to consider. So, hopefully you got all the information you needed here. If you have anything else to add, leave it in the comments below. This is the kind of stuff I love to talk about, and I think you do too. And otherwise, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.